All right, guys, what is up? Welcome in another episode of GC Live, getting you ready for South Carolina versus Ole Miss. I am Wes Mitchell. We'll be joined momentarily by Chris Clark. Also, have a great interview with our guy, Neil McCready, who is going to take us through a little bit of the Ole Miss side of this thing as we get ready for Gamecocks versus Rebels. Coming up this weekend, of course, at Ole Miss, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, kickoff. And before we get into that, though, before we get to Neil's interview, I'm going to tell you about a couple of our great sponsors. Then we'll tell you a little bit later in the show about a couple of other great sponsors of ours. Of course, presenting sponsor here on the show, as it's been for 3-4 years now. Believe it or not, time flies. It's our guy, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Like we always tell you, if you're in the market for a new home or you're even thinking about home ownership, Clint's your guy. He was my guy. Several of my buddies have used Clint to buy homes as well. Great guy, great Gamecock, great supporter of this show as well. Like we always tell you, I know not everybody on here, maybe most everybody on here right now is not looking to buy a home at this exact moment. But if you get into that point where you're ready to buy a home, hit up our guy, Clint. He's going to take outstanding care of you. And one of our other great sponsors that we are kind of welcoming to the show the last couple months, it is our friends at Brunt Workwear. Got a chance to sample the boot myself here now. Awesome boot from Brunt. If you're on the video version of the podcast right now, you can see me holding it up, man. This thing is well designed. The beauty of Brunt is that if you need a great work boot, but that you want to have some comfort level in there as well, this is the boot for you, man. It is great right out of the box. There's not really that long break-in period you're going to see with a lot of boots. Just a sturdy, well-designed, just honestly beautiful craftsmanship here from our friends at Brunt. And so, as always, if we have a sponsor, we want to make it where you can take advantage of something as well. And so, if you want to try Brunt for yourself, hit them up at bruntworkwear.com/GC. Code GC is going to get you $10 off your first order from our friends at Brunt. It's not just work boots. They offer a full range of high-performance gear built for tough jobs, heavy-duty work pants, weather-resistant jackets. Maybe you're going to the game. It's going to be bad weather at some point. Get your weather-resistant jacket from our guys at Brunt. Designs are durable, reliable workwear. It's going to keep you protected and productive in any position. If you're here on the video version of the show, again, I am going to post, like I do every time, a link for you to get $10 off. Brunt, just look for that to pop up here in the comments. All right, guys, like I said, we're going to welcome Chris in here in a minute. We're going to break down this game. But first, as we always like to do, we like to give you some Ole Miss perspective and opponent perspective on the upcoming game. For that, this time, this is from 107.5 earlier today, but we went out to our guy. We've known Neil McCready forever. He's been covering Ole Miss, I think, for 20 years maybe. He's going to give you the scoop here on what's going on with the Rebels. We're going to go out to that interview right now.
At this Ole Miss team, again, coming in ranked in the top 10. I personally was very impressed by their win on the road this past weekend at Oklahoma. First of all, second straight road game coming off of a tough emotional loss on the road at Georgia. You had all the rumors swirling about Lane Kiffin and jobs and all that kind of stuff, and to go out there and beat quite literally one of the best defenses in all of college football, even though Brent Venables said they had the better team, I found that very impressive.
Yeah, Ole Miss had a double-digit lead, and then it got away, and Oklahoma took a 26-25 lead into the fourth quarter, and it kind of had a, oh, here we go again feel to it, where you're like, this is long answer. I'm trying to be quick. I felt like that game Saturday was potentially very consequential for the team, for the program. And it kind of felt like there was a little foreboding moment there. And that stadium got loud and they responded. Like you said, it was kind of an impressive quarter. They won the quarter 9-0 and had some defensive stops, had an 11-play, 75-yard drive, caused a turnover, got a field goal. So they did what they needed to do to win and position themselves here for this final month.
Neil, it's Wes. Great to hear your voice, man. Appreciate you hopping on. Yeah, hope you've been well. I know it's probably been a just fun, exciting, and interesting as always with Lane's season to cover, with everything outside of it too. But I want to dive into just one thing specifically. Why did Lane go from going for it on every fourth down to deciding not to?
You're asking me to get Wes. It's a great question to get inside his mind, and I've covered him for 6 years, and I have unsuccessfully cracked the code. I thought that Saturday, I thought he overcoached the game. Mm-hmm. They had a 10-point lead, and he goes for it for 4th and 1 from his own 20-yard line, basically. That felt like a real reach. And then later, another time when you say, hey, they probably should punt, they go for it and they get it. And he said, I'll give him credit. He said this before the 2020 season. He said, I'm going to give you guys plenty of ammunition to question me, but I'm going to coach it my way. And he has absolutely lived up to those words. And, he does things his own way. And he'll accept responsibility when it doesn't work out, but he's never, Wes, going to be hostage to the book. I'll tell you that. I mean, he's got his analytics, and then I think sometimes he has his gut, and sometimes he just gambles.
Neil, what's going on, man? It's Jack Veltri. Appreciate you joining us. What,
hey, Jack,
in your opinion, has been the main difference between the way Austin Simmons operated this offense at the beginning of the year versus Trinidad Chambliss, who's grabbed both hands on this wheel here and just taken it, moderated the offense completely over these last few weeks? What's been the main difference?
Yeah, Austin's 19-year-old kid, and you knew first year as a starter he was going to make some mistakes, and he did. And he got hurt at Kentucky late in that game, September the 6th. And, Trinidad Chambliss is an older guy and took Ferris State to the Division II national championship and won it. And yet, when that happened, you're like, well, this team's in trouble. And if anything, they took a step forward. He's incredibly good with pocket presence, sort of knowing where pressure's coming. It's like I've said that he seems to play with like a rearview mirror on his helmet. He sort of sees things coming behind him that he shouldn't be able to see. He definitely feels pressure and moves. He extends plays with his feet. He doesn't have the arm Simmons has at all, but he's one of those guys, and I don't know how we ever define this, but he just sort of has the it factor a little bit. I mean, he's not going to play in the NFL. He doesn't have the deep ball. He's not going to throw that 55, 60-yard pass like Lenore Sellers is where you go, no. It's not in his arsenal. But what he doesn't do is turn it over. I mean, this is like, I guess, game 6 or 7 for him as the starter, and he just doesn't throw picks. He doesn't put the ball on the ground. He sort of lives to fight another fight pretty consistently, and then every so often he'll just make a play where you go, wow, I didn't think he could do that. And he's just been very steady in that regard, and he's a fun kid. He's very charismatic, and his teammates like him. He always has a smile on his face. There's a lot of a narrative about, hey, these big environments in Athens and Norman are going to intimidate him, and because he played at Ferris State where they played in front of 700 instead of 107,000 or whatever, and he just doesn't seem to be fazed by that stuff. If anything, he's really enjoying it. He's a fun story. His college coach at Ferris State had to talk him into getting in the portal, which is a completely different. He's like, hey, you've won the championship here. Wow. You should see what else you can do, right? And and he did it, and he's been a really fun story.
Again, talking to Neil McCready here from Rebels 24/7, and Trinidad Chambliss garners a lot of the headlines for what he's done running that offense. But Kawan Lacey's put up some phenomenal numbers this year. One thing that stuck out to me, 3rd in the nation among running backs in terms of missed tackles forced. But he's had his ups and downs. Had a great performance against Washington State a couple weeks ago, ran for 142 yards, held to 31 yards the next week against Georgia. What do you make of the season that Kawan Lacey's had in the backfield?
I think he's their MVP. I really do. They did not. Last year, Ole Miss's team had everything in place to go after a national championship except for a running back. They didn't have that one running back who could do everything. They had a couple of guys who, opposing defenses could kind of guess what was coming based on personnel. Lacey has been so good in pass protection. He's not afraid to stick his nose up in there. He can get you the hard yard. He can extend negative plays to positive plays. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's been a godsend for them. Georgia just stopped their running game, and Ole Miss kind of got away from it and threw it and scored on 5 straight possessions. I mean, Ole Miss's first 5 possessions in Athens were touchdowns. They just couldn't get off the field defensively. And then in the fourth quarter, when they finally, had a mistake or two, it cost them. But they didn't lose that game because of an inability to run. They lost that game because they just couldn't get a stop. But he's been great. I mean, you're astute to notice how good of a player he is.
Neil, I know that defense lost a lot of guys to the NFL, but felt to me like there were a couple of guys up front on the defensive line, at least watching that Oklahoma game, that are kind of emerging. What have you seen from this defense? Like, who are the guys to know, and how do you feel that group looks maybe now compared to when the season started?
They've got 2 elite defensive tackles, Will Eccles, Xavier Harris. Both have played really, really well. Princewell Iman who's Princely's younger brother, has begun to play well on the edge. Suntaran Perkins kind of does different things, but opposing offense is key on him, and so he's been almost a decoy, if you will, defensively. TJ Daugherty, the former Clemson linebacker, has been pretty solid. They've really searched for a second linebacker all year, and their secondary has been shaky. I mean, look, this game Saturday night's a scary spot for Ole Miss a little bit because, they're going to get their points for sure. And I know South Carolina struggled offensively. I'm aware of all the angst and consternation as it pertains to Mike Shula and all of that. I get it. But it's still, they have some weapons. Sellers is a really gifted quarterback, big body. This Ole Miss team is not tackled well in space. They are average. I don't know what the average is. It feels like they have 2 to 3 colossal busts a game. It's prevented them from kind of winning some games comfortably. And I won't be surprised if it's more of the same on Saturday night, where South Carolina's in this game a lot longer than people might think they'll be based on the betting line.
Neil, let me ask you a follow-up to that. What do you feel like in this game, whether it's the defense, offense, you take this however you want, what are the 3 keys to this game for Ole Miss to come out on top?
I think key one, when you're playing a team that's coming off an emotional loss and a team that, let's face it, you guys know this better than I do. This season has not gone the way South Carolina had hoped it would go. I think the key number one is you jump on a team early and you sort of send that thought through their mind of, well, this, here we go again. We're 3-5. What's the difference between 3 and 6? What are we doing tomorrow when we get home? You want them to stop thinking about maybe winning a game. That's key one. Key 2 for Ole Miss is you got to get Sellers on the ground. That's hard. You can't let him get going. And then, key 3 is kind of 2 things. One is just you play your game offensively. You don't turn the ball over. And when Ole Miss does that, they score points. They score points on everybody. Kiffin's just an offensive genius. It's 6 years I've covered him now, and it's incredible. They find a weakness in every defense and go get it. That's just what they do, and they'll do it again on Saturday. It's what they do. But the key thing for them is that you can't have these big coverage bust plays that they've been having where Carolina gets some 77-yard touchdown pass because a safety got lost. You cannot continue to do that. It's playing with fire. And they did it against Georgia, and it finally burned them. They've done it kind of all year. They've given up big plays, and it's the one thing when people talk about this team making a playoff run and stuff, and I'm like, man, you got to fix that. If they could fix that, I buy it. Otherwise, I just kind of keep waiting. It's the little kid that keeps putting his hand on the stove. One of these days, that burner's going to be on.
Neil, we got about 2 minutes before a hard break. Is Lane Kiffin coaching Ole Miss next season?
I don't know. I don't know. Here's the one thing, Les, right, is time. If this team makes the playoffs, if this team wins out, and they're favored in all 4 of these games, if they went out there 11-1, they're no lower than the 6th seed. They're playing at home on December 19th or 20th. In this scenario where they win these next 3 home games, and I'm not giving them to them, but let's say they do for the sake of this argument, that'd be 21 out of 22 home games that Ole Miss has won. Then you'd have to at least give them a fighting shot, right, on a game on December 21st or 20th. If they win that game, they're playing on New Year's Day. My point is this: how long is Florida willing to wait? How long is LSU willing to wait? Especially if they're not given a firm answer behind the scenes of, yeah, I'm coming. And I'd be shocked if Lane did that.
All right, guys. That, of course, Neil McCready. Great interview from him earlier today on the game. I am Wes Mitchell, of course. Let's bring in Chris Clark. He is not going to be on video-wise today. From Parts Unknown is our guy, Chris Clark. Chris, you got me loud and clear, man?
I got you. Do you have me?
I got you. Yeah, man. Let's break this thing down. Always good stuff there from Neil. Appreciate him hopping on with us. I tell you what, man, this is another one of those games, at least for me, dude, when you kind of start to dive into some of the matchups and you think about, first of all, the fact, and the one thing that to me, the biggest difference from this past week and a game where South Carolina was a heavy underdog, but on the field found a way to fight and battle and have a shot. And then this game, similarly, a heavy underdog. The biggest difference is obviously you're playing away from Williams-Brice Stadium. You're not going to have that crowd to lean on, that momentum. As we know, if South Carolina is able to gather momentum early in a game, the Willie B crowd can kind of maybe will you to some things on the field. That, to me, is one of the biggest, I guess, challenges in terms of putting yourself in a position to pull this upset. I found myself kind of struggling to find some reasons for optimism when I looked at what Ole Miss does offensively, just the pressure they put on you by how good they are offensively. And then I think an Ole Miss defense that is not as talented as the one last year. But from a South Carolina standpoint, I do think you're concerned with what they are starting to do up front. In particular, not that this Ole Miss front is what Oklahoma's was, man, but I look at the fact that Oklahoma was able to get that pressure up the middle. They were kind of able to own the interior. Ole Miss has a couple of guys, Neil talked about it, who have been really, really good on the interior at defensive tackles. So when you're kind of looking at a matchup standpoint, those are some things that concern me. I do look at what Neil said, Chris. Ole Miss's secondary allowing 2 to 3, according to him, kind of big bust per game. I think that is noteworthy. But also, remember how we stated going into Alabama. If you have an opportunity as a DB and the ball is in your hands, you have to follow through and make that big interception. So in this context, I will say if you have Vendravius Jacobs or Nick Harbor or Donovan Murph, whoever running open down the field, you're going to have the protection, the throw, and the catch to complete it and take advantage if a couple of those opportunities do present themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you this earlier at the radio station. It seems like every team that South Carolina has played this year, when you're looking at the Gamecock offense versus the opposing defense, you've come away from every game going, man, it seems like there's some plays to be made here against the secondary. You know, LSU was maybe not quite as much that, but even, you look at Oklahoma, Wes, they're obviously still a really good defense. Before they played Ole Miss, they were ranked top 1, top 2, top 3, certainly top 5 in like every defensive category. Get to the second level against their defense, whether it's in the run game or pass game, there's some plays to be had there. Carolina wasn't able to take advantage of it. You look at the Missouri game, Carolina was able to take advantage of it. Now, they did miss a play or two here or there that ended up probably being pretty consequential, but they had a lot of success there. Alabama, it was kind of a similar conversation in that, hey, Alabama's defense is really talented, but there's some plays to be made if you can get into the secondary in the run game or downfield in the passing game. And I think we saw some of that play out. You know, Ole Miss and Bama maybe have some similarities. They're certainly not the same team, but they're two teams that are still talented defensively. Two defenses that maybe have some holes, right? That maybe aren't playing as well as they want, and two high-powered offenses that are going to put a lot of pressure on you if you're South Carolina to understand that you're going to have to go in and get some points to be able to win this game. I view it similar to the Bama game in that, you know, if you're Carolina, like I said, you know you're going to have to put up some points. You're going to have to score. Those opportunities are going to come at a premium. You can't go into this game against Lane Kiffin, his OC, Charlie Weiss Jr., and Ole Miss kind of banking on, hey, you know, let's go in here, see if we can hold them to, 17 points, right? Now, credit South Carolina's defense, Clayton White, their staff, the players. They came in and put forth, I think, a much better performance than anybody could have anticipated or even dreamed against Alabama. And that gave South Carolina a chance. So that's kind of another question, right? Can you come in and not stop this Ole Miss offense? Nobody expects that. But can you come away with some key stops? Can you force a 3-and-out here and there to kind of flip the field and play the field position game? Obviously, you're going to have to score. And, I think explosive plays and making some plays against the secondary is certainly a key part of that.
Yeah, and we always like to talk about, hey, what's the number? What's the number you're going to have to score to win the game? What's the number you're going to have to hold them to win the game? You look at what Ole Miss is doing on offense, man. I don't know that I always care so much about the raw number as much as I do. Where are you among your peers? And, are you frankly scoring enough to win games? And I think that's where Ole Miss is right now. I also like to sort it Power 5 opponents only. I think it gives you a better feel. But right now, Ole Miss, 5th in the SEC, 31.3 points per game when they're playing Power 5 opponents. You look at South Carolina, obviously, on offense, not great, 17.9 points per game. Again, we're just sorting by Power 5 opponents. So you obviously are going to have to look at keeping Ole Miss, a little bit below that number. And then you're going to have to look at something we always talk about is, can you steal one of those defensive scores? Can you steal a special team score? And, I think Ole Miss's defense is interesting, man. They had a loaded defense last year and just did not quite, obviously, take advantage of it and make that CFP run that I think a lot of them thought they maybe could last season. To me, their defense is a little bit like South Carolina in that they maybe didn't come in with quite as much preseason hype. For them, the offense certainly overshadows their defense. But then you look at the numbers, Ole Miss, and this hasn't been sorted yet, Ole Miss allowing 23 points per game, which is still pretty solid. Not dominant, but pretty good. And South Carolina allowing 21.1 points per game. And so, I think overall, this defense is maybe a little bit better than they get credit for on paper. Now, the one thing, if you kind of dive into like the efficiency ratings and some of the stuff that I don't even always understand exactly how they calculate it, to be honest, but your EPAs, which is expected points added. Ole Miss, defensively, they're pretty good in some areas. The one spot, and unfortunately for South Carolina, it's not a spot you've always been able to take advantage of. But for them, their biggest issue has been stopping the run. One of the biggest sort of deficiencies when you look at EPA per rush for defense, they're 76th in the country is Ole Miss. When you look at defensive success rate against the run, 46.3%. The short version of success rate is like on first down, did you get 5 yards? On second down, did you get halfway to the sticks? On third down or fourth down, did you convert it? If you did, it's a successful play. It counts, 1 for 1 for whoever was successful from a defensive standpoint. If it's 3rd and 5 and the offense doesn't get a first down, you're 1 for 1. You were successful on that play. Against the pass, Ole Miss, 39th in the country, so still pretty good in defense success rate. Against the run, 115 defensive success rate. So to me, this is a week where this offense, this run game, it's got to look like it did against LSU. You've got to put yourself in some 3rd and short situations. You've got to stay on the field. Ultimately, that always, for me, goes back to 16, running the ball quite a bit too.
Well, and I'll go back to a phrase you always use, Wes, and you just laid out some of those statistics that I think they do identify a potential problem area or an area that you can take advantage of if you're South Carolina. But the phrase is, can you make it matter? So that's exactly what you said, with the LSU game. You got to have a performance that's maybe not, it doesn't have to be quite that, but it's got to be similar. I think an interesting example this year, Wes, to look at is maybe Arkansas and Taylen Green. And you may say, well, that's a horrible example because Arkansas lost that game, which is true, right? But when you really dive into it, Arkansas didn't get enough stops defensively. We all know that Carolina is going to have to get some stops defensively in order to win this game, but they're also going to have and Arkansas wasn't able to merge those two well enough, but they were in that game. You look at what Taylen Green did in that game. He's a big kid who can run it, who can throw it. Obviously, Bobby Petrino does a good job offensively with his system. Taylen Green was over 100 yards rushing, and he threw for over 300 yards. I think it's going to take some really special plays, and it's going to take, as we all often say, it's going to take 16 being 16 and having kind of one of those vintage performances where, Ole Miss's D-line, they're going to win some plays up front, specifically defensive tackle. Can he wiggle out of some of those? Can South Carolina put those guys into conflict a little bit with some of the things that they do in the run game with RPOs? Can they hit some explosive plays? Because as Neil McCready told you guys in that interview, they have a couple big busts to games. So when you're adding it up, when you're trying to find that path for Carolina, it's creating some explosive plays like we've seen all season for them. They've actually been, Wes, a pretty good team. If you look at the national rankings, they're not at the top of the country, but they've scored their points because of explosive plays largely. South Carolina has. You would like for them to be more consistent, of course, but they have found explosive plays. So can they hit some of those and take advantage? But then can they also just be more efficient, go put some drives together, keep that dangerous Ole Miss offense off the field?
Yeah, for sure. And, man, I tell you what, Lane Kiffin and his offense, it's kind of one of those things where if you're listening to this, you're a Gamecock fan, you don't really enjoy watching your team go against them and go against it. But if you're a neutral observer on a Saturday afternoon, watching him kind of match wits with Brent Venables and Oklahoma and, kind of what's Lane Kiffin going to come up with this weekend? What's the game plan going to be this weekend? Something Neil mentioned, like he's just going to attack your weaknesses, man. And so I'll be very curious. Clayton White mentioned 4 or 5 times, or this will be the 4th or 5th time he's gone up against Lane Kiffin, matched wits. I thought the Gamecocks, they had a phenomenal plan last week against Alabama. For much of that game, held them made them play a game that was completely uncharacteristic for Alabama. We're used to them staying on the field, destroying the time of possession battle, making first downs, and you had 3 and out after 3 and out forced by the South Carolina defense. You have an Ole Miss team where, I traditionally think of Kiffin's offenses. I think of Jackson Dart last year. I think of explosive. They can score at any point. They're going to attack me deep. They're going to attack me down the field. I feel like it's a different scheme than we saw last week against Alabama. Completely different. But it is a little bit more of a slow burn, a little bit more of I'm going to take what you give me. they've kind of eliminated some of the boom or bust aspect of it, Chris, and it's more of an efficient operation, I feel like. Looking at some of those same numbers, third or fourth down success, which this comes from Parker Fleming, Stat War. I really like the idea of just adding those together, because if you don't get it on third down, but on that particular sequence, you say we're going for it on fourth, and then you are successful. I think that should be a successful sequence of downs, and that's what he does here. Third or fourth down success for Ole Miss, 51.6%. That is 14th in the country. And Chris, I kind of like this metric too. Quality drive rate. What does that mean? That means a quality drive is just what it sounds like. You didn't go 3 and out. You had a successful drive where you started moving the ball. I believe from a technical standpoint, they mapped that out by, did you have a first down within your opponent's 40-yard line? So we're not quite having to get to the red zone, but you're basically mapping out, did you move the ball? Did you flip the field if that was a situation where you were kind of starting in bad field position? And so Ole Miss, 4th in the country in quality drive rate. 60% of the time they have the ball, they're getting to your 40. So this feels like kind of one of those games where it's probably going to be a little bit frustrating to watch if you're a South Carolina fan and the defense is on the field. There may be these kind of time-consuming drives. There may be these drives where you throw your remote at the TV because they convert another third down. None of that's going to matter if South Carolina can be stern in the red zone, if they can force some field goals, if you can turn them over a little bit. I feel like this is deja vu for all the other games this year, but that's just the flow Ole Miss is going to be in. If you're dropping back into cover 4, they're going to throw the quick hitch, and you're going to be throwing your remote saying, why are the DBs so far off the wide receivers? Well, I think it's going to be a situation where Clayton White and that defensive staff, you're going to have to pick your moments. You're going to have to be aggressive at times, but there may be times where you just say, hey, we'll play bend but don't break. We will play this game. We'll let the clock run. We'll shorten the game and kind of make Kiffin and these guys march their way down the field. Now, the unfortunate part of that, Chris, is that they have shown this year they are fully capable of just doing just that.
Yeah, and it's really hard because you're going against a coach who is aggressive. Not only is Ole Miss sitting at 50% on third down, so it's hard to get off the field with them in general. But if you're sitting there, normally you're watching your team play, Wes, and you get off the field on a 3rd and 4, and if you get a stop for no gain in the running game, if there's an incomplete pass, you're starting to celebrate unless the ball's in the red zone and field goal range, because you're going, all right, we're getting off the field here. Here's a punt. You don't really always get that luxury with Lane Kiffin because he may very well go for it. And as you just pointed out there, they have success with it. So they make you play 4 downs of defense as opposed to 3 more often than other teams. And then the other problem that compounds things is they're really good at playing offense on all 4 of those downs, right? So they don't just take risk as kind of an average, middle of the pack offense. They do it as a really good offense. So it puts, that extra pressure on you. So, when you're looking at the upset formula, I hate to be cliche and say, well, you got to get some turnovers, but I do think that is a reality here. Last week, one of the keys for South Carolina is, man, can you get a turnover off Ty Simpson? Because he just doesn't turn the football over. And they're able to do that, just the second all season on the fumble that Makari Swain forced. Of course, it didn't end up being enough, but it was certainly an important play in the game because you're getting the ball back. Bama's drive-ins. Bama doesn't have a chance to go down and score. I think you're going to need to do that here. You look at Ole Miss, Wes, one of the things that they've not been very good at is turnover margin. They're actually towards the bottom nationally. They're tied for 102nd, and they're in some company of some teams that, frankly, aren't very good this year. They've only forced, let me look here. They've gained 5 turnovers, so they forced 5 turnovers defensively, and they've lost 8. So -3 for the season, not some huge discrepancy. But again, it's something where if you're looking at how can we slow down a very aggressive, very talented, very difficult to prepare for and scheme for offense, I mean, that's an obvious direction that you go is if you're Carolina and Clayton White, his teams typically very good forcing turnovers. That's been one of their hallmarks. Can you do it on the road? That's going to be a key here.
Yeah, and, Trinidad Chambliss, not a guy who necessarily has put the ball in danger a ton. Can you get to him? Can you hit him a little bit? Can you force him to maybe make some of those mistakes? Not to go back to this well again, but we will. If you have those opportunities, man, are you able to take advantage of them? Luckily for South Carolina, the way that game played out this past week, you had some miscues on defense, but they were followed up by really good plays on defense. So maybe they got covered up a little bit. Not all of them got covered up, obviously, but early on, I mean, dude, when they had the third down stop followed by, oh, no, not a third down stop, 12 men on the field, 5-yard penalty, still third and long, missed tackle, first down, I'm going, that is something you cannot do against the Alabama Crimson Tide and win the game. Lo and behold, you have the what I didn't realize at the time, but realized later was the double cornerback blitz from Bakari, Swain, and Cisse on the other side. And you got the turnover. I'm pretty sure that was all in sequence. You got the turnover right after that. You had one of the kind of dropped interceptions, probably the most just, wow, that should have been a pick, where you had Peyton Williams at the goal line, and it would have been like a punt that you didn't get. But I think in sequence was a fourth down where Alabama went for it, and they didn't get it. So you actually ended up with good field position there. So some of your mistakes on defense got covered up a little bit. Obviously, not all of them did. Frankly, there were a couple of deep balls where Alabama has a step and either Carolina closes on the ball and breaks it up, or Ty Simpson just missed. So Trinidad Chambliss, obviously, they put a lot on his shoulders, man. They put a lot of trust on him. That, to me, man, this is one of those things. Kiffin's going to get you at least a couple times a game. Does Chambliss hit those? Can Carolina force him to be uncomfortable at all? I got to give credit to this kid, though, man. For a guy who was not playing in the SEC or anywhere close to it last season, he really does not seem to get too just rattled or anything. Like, he really seems to be pretty calm, seems to be enjoying life and enjoying this opportunity and not taking it like too seriously in terms of like the moment. And I think you got to give him credit. Like, it'll be very interesting. Obviously, Ole Miss has a much better offense around him. But to me, when we get to the end and we compare what Lenoris is able to do to what Trinidad is able to do, how do those numbers look? Is there still a Lenoris go-off game building up somewhere in there? Is there a week where we look back, Chris, and we say, man, that looked like the Missouri passing attack, the passing attack against Missouri, I should say, and the run game against, I don't know, Kentucky. Like, is there a week where it just all does come together for Lenoris? We'll see. Obviously, the turnover this past week was huge, the fumble. There were some missed throws this past week, man. I did feel like the offense, though, itself, I just liked the approach. I liked the game plan. I liked the play calling, the vibe, the rhythm a little bit more this past week than we have for most of the season for South Carolina.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was a big storyline coming out of the game. And I think it's going to be really important, Wes. We were talking earlier on the takeover hour on 107.5 about last year's game, right? And it was an odd game with how it started. Now it ended up being, I think technically a blowout from a scoreboard standpoint. It was a 3 technically or 4 score game, 24-point margin. But, with the way that game started and the way Ole Miss seemed to be moving the ball, like you almost got the feel it could have been worse from a score standpoint. And they kind of took the approach of kind of sitting on the ball more. They weren't very good. Ole Miss wasn't on third down. It was a strange game, but why did the game play out that way? Well, early on, South Carolina had the fake punt. They had, what was it, either a fumble or an interception early. And then every time it seemed like, hey, here's an opportunity to seize some momentum, South Carolina was unable to do it. You know, a bad play, a penalty, a turnover, a 3-and-out. They just weren't able to answer. And so you look up and they've dug, you know, a 14-0 hole very early. And then they weren't able to get enough stops. They weren't able to generate enough offensively. In this game, I think it's going to be very important to be able to start well early. You know, that's something South Carolina did against Alabama. Now, it was at home. It was a different situation. But they were able to string together some stops and do enough offensively to stay into the game where if you start clock watching, you get to it and you go, okay, it's the third quarter. South Carolina is in range. You look up and you say, okay, it's the fourth quarter. South Carolina is leading the game. I think getting this game to the fourth quarter and then giving yourself an opportunity to finish is obviously critical. That may seem obvious, but there's been some games this season where South Carolina did not get the thing to the fourth quarter with a chance to win. There have been others where they did. You know, you think about Missouri, think about LSU, you think about last week against Bama. Win one of those or two of those, and the outlook's a little bit different than what it is right now. This team's got to be able to get it to the fourth quarter and then finish.
Well, and as good as Ole Miss is, and I do think they're a good team, I think Neil made a great point. A lot of these teams we're talking about, man, you're saying there are some really good to great to maybe even some elite aspects, but then you're saying there's that one area. Are they good enough to win a national title? Are they good? I think they're definitely good enough to make the CFP. Are they good enough to win the whole thing? Or is that one little kind of Achilles heel going to be what keeps them from doing it? So Ole Miss, yeah, I would say a good to great team. You start going down just on a broad standpoint, look at what they've done this year in the games they've won, though, man. At Kentucky, 30-23, 7-point game versus Arkansas, 41-35, 6-point game. They did blow out Tulane. LSU, 24-19. Washington State, 24-21. Georgia, a loss, 43-35. They went toe-to-toe with them in Athens. Give them credit there. And then at Oklahoma, a game they kind of controlled early, lost control of, and then regained control of, although Oklahoma is driving. If you watch that game at the end, John Mateer has two throws that I expect my Heisman watch quarterback to make that he just either misses the throw or didn't even see the receiver, or Oklahoma's driving down to try to tie the thing up. So they end up holding on 34-26, but the play was there. The play was open for Oklahoma. So they have, I think part of the reason you heard Neil there at the end say, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing's tight. He watches every game. He sits there. He breaks it down. He's seeing Ole Miss is winning, but they're not winning big. So what does that mean for South Carolina this weekend? Again, I still think you'd feel a lot better about this thing and Carolina pulling the upset if you were at Willie B. But we will see what happens. Chris, before we give our final thoughts and our predictions, I'm going to pull up the graphics for you. Why don't you tell everybody about Palmetto Golf and Belts and then Ferry Chevrolet?
Yeah, Palmetto Golf and Belts at palmettogolfing.com. You can check them out today. See him on the Insiders Forum all the time. Brandon Cohen, our guy who's a big South Carolina fan, longtime Gamecock Central member. Go check out his online store if you're a golfer. Even if you're not, you can find a gift for that golfer in your life. Custom golf gloves, belts, towels, and tees. The needlepoint belts have been extremely popular. A lot more affordable than a lot of the other options you're going to find in stores or online, and just as well made. So check those out. Again, palmettogolfing.com. Check out his online storefront. He's got specials running all the time. Members on Gamecock Central are loving the products. The cross design, the Palmetto tree and moon. It's got a variety of colors, variety of designs. Go check them out today. That's palmettogolfing.com. We're also going to tell you about our friends over at Ferry Chevrolet. That's F-A-I-R-E-Y, Ferry Chevrolet. Since 1926. They started in St. Matthews, now located conveniently in Orangeburg. So you can check them out if you're close to Columbia, if you're in Charleston. Of course, it's right in between those. Check out their online inventory, ferrychevrolet.com. They're just finishing up truck month, got financing options, new and used vehicles, honesty, integrity, and a handshake. That's how they operate over at Ferry Chevrolet. So if you're in the market, check them out, ferrychevrolet.com.
Definitely shout out to all of our awesome sponsors here on GC Live. If you're on the video version, I think I just flipped this, Chris, but we're almost done. I'm just gonna let it roll. Final keys, final predictions. I mean, copy paste, red zone, third down, turnovers. That's a given. Let me throw that out there, but then throw it to the side. I want to give you something specific, so we don't just let's not find comfort with that, man. Let's find something specific. I'm gonna say this Carolina O-line. They've gotten they look a little better, right? Like they really do. They look a little better. Ole Miss, not quite the D-line they had last year. D-line last year was loaded. But they've had some guys emerging, man. They had some guys last week. They got a couple of stud defensive tackles. They got an edge guy who's coming along. Can you control those guys? Specifically, I'm looking at Boaz or Nolan Hay if he gets back in there at center. I'm looking at Shed Surratt or Nick Sharp, whoever's in there at left guard. And I'm looking at our guy Tro Ball at right guard. Can you give some space to these running backs? The one weakness on paper is Ole Miss's defense on a down-to-down basis in the running game. Can those guys hold up? And then, of course, if some of these big plays are going to be there for the taking in the passing game, can you hold up in the pass protection area and not let it be like Oklahoma? You know, if there's one thing quarterbacks hate more than outside edge pressure, it's interior pressure because there's nowhere to go and there's no pocket to step up into. So I'll give you, again, the broad is all the stuff we always talk about, the specific interior line play for the Gamecocks. Man, I'll go. I haven't had to give a score yet anywhere, so I'm kind of doing this on the fly. I've been going back and forth. On paper, it's hard to see the upset, but it's kind of easy to see Carolina possibly hanging in there. I know people will think that's crazy after last year's game against Ole Miss. But you know what, man? Forget it. I'm going to say Gamecocks 28, Ole Miss 24. No reason, just that the Cockvember is here. At some point, South Carolina was going to pull an upset in this 5-game stretch. They're running out of time to do it. And I don't think many people are going to be picking them. So I'm just going to pick them to win, and then I can brag if they do it.
You're just going to keep firing it off. You didn't last week, so you took a week off.
Yeah,
firing off the upset pick.
Not bragging, but I did. And I got a hard out. I got to hop off here. Not bragging, but I did say it was going to be 28-21 Bama last week, and it was 29-22 last week.
Yeah,
so
that was a good call.
I was on that one.
One quick key, Wes. No empty possessions for South Carolina. You can't go 3 and out constantly against this team, and that's to go. That goes with all those other things that you got to do to spur an upset. I do have Ole Miss in this one. I've got Ole Miss 34, South Carolina 24. I think it's going to be hard to get stops, hard to do enough offensively, but we'll see.
We shall see. All right, he is Chris Clark. I am Wes Mitchell. Appreciate Neil McCready. Appreciate all of our sponsors, and appreciate you guys for hopping on, hanging out with us. This has been GC Live. We'll be back on Monday. Complete reaction here on the show. South Carolina, Ole Miss. Y'all have a great weekend, and we'll see you then.